Welcome back to Polo Talks. This is Mark Politino, hosting today with my good friend Joe coming in here. There he is.
How's it going?
Doing good. Glad to have you back,
Yeah, I know.
as
I'm
always.
excited for today.
What did you say?
I've been excited for today. This is like one of the best parts of my Wednesday. So
Yeah, me too. I'll be honest. I was really excited for it too. But yeah, we have a lot of good stuff like topics and stuff to talk about in the future. But today, a couple things I wanted to talk about. So first and foremost, I was kind of thinking about talking about the cannabis industry, um, as it is for obviously for legal cannabis for legal uh, states who have legalized it currently, or also going forward that look like they're about to legalize it. Just because I think that it's kind of added a whole nother realm of possibilities when it comes to state income, and there's a lot of good that can come from it too. Um, Obviously, there's people that it's kind of a controversial issue for them, but for me personally, I've kind of been embracing it, and not to say that I'm smoking it because I don't smoke, but I just think it's cool, and I think it is a benefit to the community. Um, what do you think about it before I jump into what I was going to say?
so I mean personally I don't smoke weed. However, I do agree the fact that marijuana has been proven to be very medicinal in many different situations, especially involving someone with cancer, or someone taking chemo, or someone with a chronic that has to do with chronic pain. I mean, alcohol doesn't have any kind of benefits at all. Just so it doesn't really make sense as to why you would continue to legalize alcohol and not want to legalize marijuana. And I definitely think that we're only scratching the surface of what about like what we could do with marijuana and its purpose. I think the one thing that's hindering it the most is the fact that it is illegal. So not there can't be there's not a lot of science based on what it like what other uses marijuana has and what other benefits besides the fact of like instead of just getting high or killing pain, but there could be multiple different um medicinal uses for marijuana.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I mean it is something that with anything that hasn't really been able to be tested. So I mean, obviously there's been a lot of testing, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed studies on it, but um, at the level that we would potentially need it at, I think that's it is kind of a hindrance. I would agree with you on that. Um, one of the things that I've been it's something that I thought about before, right? Because I was, kind of venturing into the whole legal cannabis and everything, and from a state perspective, it's cool because it's localized and everything. But then you start looking at places like California, who's already had it legalized for a long time already, recreationally. Um, and they're running into issues now because they're basically mass producing for a single state, and so they have a bunch of cultivators that are making or growing marijuana or growing cannabis, and the distribution isn't there because there's not enough demand for the amount of product that they're generating. And so we're seeing issues where a lot of businesses may actually end up failing, and then because it's not federally recognized, you can't go through like bankruptcy, and you can't do federal bailouts and things like this. So it's a lot of people that are going to be like defaulting on loans and losing a lot of their investments. So it's pretty serious when it comes to when you think about things like this. But one thing that was brought to my attention recently was that um, with the federalization of cannabis, like that would come with a whole lot more. So somebody, I was talking about, yeah, it might be nice if they would legalize it federally, because then, you can have distribution between different states and everything. And somebody's like, well, hold on, you might not want that, because think about the all of the government involvement that you would get in that case, and that's not something I thought about before, but it's true. Like, think about the level of involvement. Like, it's already heavily regulated on the state level. Can you only imagine what that would be at a federal level? So um, it makes me wonder. And we have a poll going to on the site. So if you go to palotalks.com, you could actually click the link and it'll direct you over to the poll. But I'm generally curious about what people think about that. Like, do they think that it is something that should be federalized, or is it better that it's more local and that it stays that way? What do you think about that?
Um, I don't know. In my my personal beliefs is like I'm a huge proponent for small government. So basically anything where we could leave government out, things could kind of maybe do better. Um and I could definitely see in that instance of not wanting to federally legalize it. But like at the same time, what you're talking about, or in California where there's more growers than there are distributors, and I kind of base a lot of that I kind of assumed that this was going to be an issue, only because like it's the new thing, it's the trending thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the hype right now. So everyone wants to start a dispensary, everyone wants to be a grower, and sooner or later we're going to reach that tipping point where the demand is losing traction, but the growing is continuously going. And I think, yeah, California, one of the biggest issues is that, so if they have a huge supply of marijuana that's not being able to be distributed because not a lot of people want to purchase it, then I mean, by all means, like it to me, it's common sense that you would like find distributors outside of California that would want to take it. Um, but I don't know. That's kind of it's kind of a fragile situation, only because whatever power that you kind of give the federal government, they are either gonna want more, but you're never gonna give it back. You're never gonna get it back. It's just, once you kind of let them in the door to something, then they're gonna like slowly creep their way in into trying to take over like multiple facets about like the marijuana industry. And then I mean there's already a lot of history um of them doing this in the industry already. I mean, in like the automotive industry, you kind of saw um so I mean everyone knows like there's Ford, Chevy, GM, Chrysler, there's Dodge. But like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, there were International Harvester, there was Rambler, there was what's his name? There was a man, I can't believe I forgot his name. Anyway, there was a lot of like independent car um creators, a lot of independent automobile makers in that time frame. And as soon as people kind of allowed government to step in and say, okay, so they need to regulate the safety and the traffic and what goes on, like determining speed limits, determining um, like DOT standards of what today is DOT. Um, it made it hard for those independent manufacturers to compete with the companies like Ford, GM, and Chrysler and Dodge. And sooner or later, they kind of got snuffed out. So now you're kind of in this same situation where you're like, you don't know if you really want the federal government to kind of like come in and start regulating certain things, because that kind of leads to the opportunity of creating like huge corporate um, weed distributors in the United States or anywhere like that. So yeah, it's kind of a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that I am concerned with as well. Is it's just like right now, I kind of like the fact that it's more localized because you kind of get more of this like local brewery feel where the brewing industry was really popping for a minute, and everybody wanted to start a microbrewery, and so now you have these micro cannabis businesses being started, and I think that it has a really cool feel to it because, for one, I mean, if you look at the way that it's broken down, it's kind of forcing or trying to engage multiple aspects of the business to incorporate one another. So, if you're wanting to be a cultivator, you need a license for cultivation, like specifically for growing. If you want to distribute, you need to have a license for a courier to be a courier. If you
Mhm.
want to manufacture the product, like if you want to package it yourself and sell it, you have to have a manufacturing license. If you want to sell it, on retail, you have to have a retail license. So there's all these different aspects of the business, and it's broken down and structured in a way that unless you have like a vertically integrated business, and those licenses are obviously quite a bit more expensive, but if you are going with this with one specialty and you have a license for that, you have to incorporate other businesses, other local businesses. And so I kind of like that in a way. It's really hectic if you are trying to get into it and you're trying to do paperwork and trying to find different people to kind of make this work, make this connection, and go out there and network. But um, the thing that I like about it though is that um, it does kind of benefit the local community in that sense, because if you do have somebody that that they just want to be a courier, you're helping to employ that courier or that courier's business. If you're wanting to do that, and vice versa, all the way up and down the ladder with it. So I think it's cool because it does benefit the community and benefit locally. um, there's now starting to be some um, I guess you could say like uh, corporate like integration, I guess you could say, because you have some companies that are working that have been doing it for a while in their states, and now that like here in New Mexico, like we just started, allowing it to be done recreationally. You have some of these other businesses that are already kind of versed in it coming into New Mexico and trying to set up shop here, And so that's kind of the same thing like you're talking about. If it's federally recognized, it's federally legal, you're going to have these huge corporations that are just going to kind of take over the small mom and pop stores and local farmers and
Mhm.
basically push them out because they're not going to be able to produce at the level that a multi-billion-dollar corporate structure has, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Yeah, that does make sense. Man, it is crazy to hear about the different types of license that you have to get, though. Like, I've never really looked into doing this, but dang, that's a lot. That's a lot of license. Because I remember, so when I was a mechanic, really the only way that you could become a master technician was if you got all 7 levels of certifications, and this was ranging from like basically like a brake systems technician. So you'd have to get a certification in the brake system, engine 1 and 2. Then you have what was it? Engine rebuild. Then you have transmission. There was, my God, there was quite a few certifications, and it wasn't actually until so like you would have to get different levels of certifications to become a master tech. But then the other situation is that if you end up working for like a major corporation like Toyota or Nissan or Honda, even if you had the 7 certifications claiming that you're a master technician, you still wouldn't be considered a master technician unless you took that car company's school. And basically, you had to basically start from ground zero, and then you had to go
Wow.
to their school to get certifications in their own certifications in order to become a master tech at an actual like major dealership or in a major dealership. And yeah, it really kind of muddied the waters because it really does suck because you put in a lot of time and a lot of energy and in reading and studying, and only to kind of it turns out that you're only going to be a master technician at some shops but not everything. But
Yeah.
it's crazy because like once you get into, I guess, when the corporate kind of distributors start to come in, you're I don't know, it's going to be a whole different outlook because now you
Yeah.
got those licenses, but now you have to get the federal license in order to be a courier,
Yeah.
to be a distributor, and it's just going to cause even more kind
And
of
then the taxation.
yeah, the taxation too. It's going to be ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean,
mean,
like you said, I mean, you have these other companies that are going to come in, like corporations and stuff. I mean, I guess the thing that I kind of my mind jumps to right away is Walmart. When Walmart comes into smaller communities, it kind of forces out a lot of the smaller like mom and pop organizations and stuff. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying on that. It's really got my wheels spinning over here.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, the like when it becomes federally legalized, yeah, then you're definitely going to run into a situation where it's going to be even more expensive to get those licenses, and then that basically rolls out any kind of like local businesses into wanting to get into the industry, and then it sooner or later everything's gonna be in the favor of major distributors or major growers or major sellers, and so it's these days have definitely feel like we're in the frontier because you got artificial
Yeah.
intelligence, you got VR, AR, and the part that it plays in small businesses. Now you got the cannabis industry, you got electrical vehicle industry coming up, and now it's just his. We definitely live in some strange times. And you got the cryptocurrency. You got not even just cryptocurrency, but you really got like the blockchain industry or the blockchain. So it's definitely going to be pretty crazy future.
I have a feeling like at one point the fiats or the traditional money is just going to be obsolete. and everything's going to go to crypto.
Hmm. Yeah, not to get sidestepped. I mean, due to the inflation, I mean,
Yeah, that's what I
the
think.
government does the government doesn't really have any way to fix the inflation, and I think honestly the only way that they can is if they hyperinflate the dollar to basically destroy it and then release. I mean, there's already been a few articles a few months ago that I read that the government is looking into starting their own crypto or their
Yeah,
blockchain
that makes sense.
currency to basically replace the dollar. And it's, I don't know, we'll kind of see. I mean, the fact that the government is already kind of playing around with that kind of gives you the idea of what we're going to be heading into anyway. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting. We'll see. We'll see. And I haven't really read anything further into it since the last time.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of the decentralized currencies, and it would be stupid for the governments not to incorporate it. But I mean, and then it looks like, it might end up being like one world currency, like with Bitcoin or something,
Hmm.
where you're looking at
Yeah.
something that's very easily recognizable, where everybody, knows what it is, everybody associates it with value, because obviously that's the one thing that makes it work, is that we have to believe that it holds value. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very
I
easy
mean,
transition to make if everybody's on board, but then
yeah.
it's also kind of scary too. So
Yeah. I
it's
mean, yeah, the dollar
kind
is
of
a
a catch
perfect
22.
example. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, the dollar is a perfect example where we perceive that it has some kind of value, like a $1 bill has a value of a $1 bill. A $5 bill has a value of a $5 bill. But really, after the U.S. currency stepped out of the gold standard,
Mm-hmm.
it all of a sudden it's like, does the dollar really have any kind of value? All of it is just what do you call it? It's all perceived. Yeah, the
Yeah.
perception of it having value. So it's
Kids.
I know.
Yeah, no, it's all perceived. It's basically perceived. I mean, now we don't even have anything tangible, to be honest. Like I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I held money in my hand. Um, Everything's just
I
electronic.
I can't even tell you the last time I had my wallet. Like Apple Pay. Like that's all I do is Apple Pay, and I feel bad because someone on the corner asked me for $1, and I'm like, I seriously do not have $1. I
Yeah.
have my phone, and that's pretty much it. Like I don't have
Yeah,
my
back in the
license. I don't have
day,
anything.
like you had your last dollar and you're like, you had to really think about it. Now it's like
Yeah,
I can't help you, buddy. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. I'm like,
But
unless you accept Venmo or even like
oh my
Apple
gosh.
Pay, then I could do
Can you imagine
something.
now
But
going forward? I think that's gonna be how it is. You're gonna have some people in the corner
yeah,
with their crypto wallets.
yeah, yeah. What's your ID? What's your identification number? I'll send something to.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, man.
I
You're
can't
right, man.
guarantee
It's
that
crazy
five.
times.
Yeah, I can't guarantee that $5 is going to be worth $5 tomorrow. But there
Yeah.
you go. Whatever helps.
Super volatile, but might
Yeah.
get a cheeseburger today. But you brought up a really good point though, and it kind of bridges into what I wanted to talk about next, which was actually um, government overreach and just kind of I think when you start to get into business, and it's not just something that like one or two people have told me, but a lot of people that that I know that have started businesses, have kind of their views kind of change. Like, you start realizing how certain things work, and you start thinking like, okay, this really isn't fair. And one of the things that government does have that it's not something that I've always been a fan of. I can understand the need for it to an extent, but is antitrust laws, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think when it was originally established, which I want to say was the Sherman Act, or I know there's two acts that came before the FTC Act, but um, originally it was understandable because you had these, big companies, industries that were basically just monopolizing the industry, and so I can understand making things a little bit fairer playing field and allowing other companies to kind of come in and compete. But where's that line, And I think that you really touched on it really well earlier when you had brought it up. But you, if you give the government just a little bit, like let's say like a little bit off topic from the business talk, but um, the U.S. Patriot Act, right? Which I always like was fascinated with that because the whole word U.S. Patriot Act is all an acronym, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
crazy. But but with the U.S. Patriot Act, there's a necessity for a little bit of lenience to kind of pull back a little bit on our rights. But like you said, you when you give the government a little bit, you usually don't get it back, and usually they kind of overstep that boundary. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things I wanted to talk about was the what is it? The
The Junk Fees Act.
junk fees. Yeah, the junk fees. Thank you. I appreciate that. So the junk fees, and I totally forgot what they were calling it now, but I think it's Junk Fee Prevention Act.
Yeah.
And so for that one, I just don't. I don't know how I feel about it because, well, I do know how I feel about it. Actually, I don't really like it because for me, it is one of those things where it's like how much, how far can you go, because you're giving the FTC full um, scope here where they can just kind of determine on what that act would mean to them. And so in certain situations, they are the ones that are going to be making that decision. And then they're also the ones that are going to be enforcing the decision. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of steps away from that balance of power. And also, um, to what extent are they going to implement that? And are they going to, be fining everybody at the same level? Um, my biggest thing with it is the cost to consumers, because when you think about it, um, whenever you have whenever you have a fee or something that's attached. So like let's take this for example, right? Like let's say that you have a um, a cellular service, right? And you have additional fees that you have to tack on in certain circumstances, right? When you tack those fees on in those certain circumstances, that's the fees getting pushed to the specific consumer that it applies to. When you don't have an additional fee, the company may have to implement that fee elsewhere, right? And so obviously, businesses are going to try to keep their profit margin. There's At the end of the day, that's the whole point of having a business, is you need to make money. Um, and if you're a corporation, you need to make money for your shareholders. You got fiduciary duty to do so. So when you take these fees out from like individuals where it may apply, you're those companies are most likely going to incorporate that fee into the general cost of their
Mm-hmm.
product or service. And so it's going to raise the cost of products and services. So it's going to actually negatively impact consumers. And again, this is my opinion, and I'm not sure. I was reading the actual act itself, and I have actually a link on it on the poll that I put up. But with that being said, though, I mean, first of all, do you think that that's something that's going to get pushed off to consumers, or do you think that the government's going to find a way to only implement and penalize people that are doing these fees that they deem to be excessive or unjust, I guess you could say?
I definitely think consumers are gonna have to pay more for anything. And like there's no sugarcoating the thing about business is cash flow is the bloodline to any kind of business. Doesn't matter what business you have. If you don't have the cash flow coming in, then you're pretty much dead in the water. Um and the whole kind of the I wish that there were good. I mean, what the government does, I think, is in good intentions, but it always ends up having a negative outcome to consumers, to businesses, and ultimately to um, people trying to create a business in order to to live a free life. And I definitely think that something like this is gonna set way. I mean, I kind of feel like a lot of laws tend to be um not it's not subliminal. I use this word all the time and I just forgot about it. But dang, I can't believe I got that like my train of thought. But anyway, so there's never really anything concrete about what a government deems worthy to be excessive taxed or anything like that. And I do think a lot of like such as Ticketmaster, there's that whole issue with Ticketmaster about them charging on fees about I mean God who knows what. Like I do think there's some pretty shady stuff going on with Ticketmaster. And in the perfect society, there should always be a competitor wanting to not only, compete against Ticketmaster by saying, you know what, they're going to charge this price, we're going to charge this price. We're not going to tack on those fees that Ticketmaster does because we think that's too excessive. Um, but they also kind of say, and they're also benefiting the community at the same time. Um, in a perfect society, that's how it works. Unfortunately, there are going to be some instances where maybe the government does have to step in, but like I said before, it's a tricky part because they're always going to want to say, okay, so we're just going to control this area right here, this small area. This is what we're going to take care of, and you have nothing else to worry about. But then sooner or later, they're going to say, you know what? Like this kind of associates with this area, so we're going to have to start kind of getting into this. And then sooner or later, they're going to say, you know what? Actually, this part of the industry kind of correlates to what we're doing now. So then we're going to have to we're going to have to look into this too. And then it starts like a chain reaction about, you know, I think one of the classic examples is insurance. So health insurance is like ridiculous if you're paying for your own insurance. And like I know this from experience.
Yeah.
Health insurance is ridiculous. Like the it's expensive and it's crazy. It literally I feel like it promotes people just to rely on government versus wanting to be your own free person. But the thing that really sucks is that you can only get insurance that's within your state, but you can't get pricings from a different state or like from a different insurance company that's from a different state. Someone who's willing to like have maybe a cheaper price for a better policy. And I know that's kind of a classic example of what has happened to kind of health insurance, is because the government decided to say, you know what, it's unfair that, that these people can't afford insurance, but these people can. So we're gonna have to provide this insurance. And then the insurance companies are like, you know what, if they're gonna, like, we're gonna have to compensate for giving these people kind of free healthcare. We're gonna have to charge extra in order to compensate for that. And
Yeah.
it started a kind of a chain reaction to now it's like health insurance is just like crazy ridiculous.
Well, not only that, but it also bogs down the system too. So I mean,
Mhm.
you have people that go into the ER for something that could be handled, with a regular appointment the next day, but they go because they don't have to worry about paying for it. I know for me, I have to be like, something has to be happening because I am not going to pay $150 copay just because I'm sneezing or
Yeah.
something. You know what I mean? Like it, like I need
My
X-rays
arm is
or
gonna have to
something
come
has to
off in
happen.
order for me to go
Yeah,
in. If you can't sew it and you can't super glue it, then I'll go in.
exactly. If there's something broken, then we'll think about going in, but
Yeah.
otherwise we need to wait on that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
If
I
my
mean,
leg is
and
3 times the size of my other leg, then yeah, we'll go in.
yeah, yeah, there has to be something notably wrong, like severely wrong, for me to
Yeah.
have to go in, just because I can't afford it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that nowadays you see, like, with healthcare, if somebody is, and I think that, it is something where everybody should have the right to be taken care of, and nobody should be impeded by that. But at the same time, though, I think it's like the same thing with a lot of government programs. I think that the intention is there, and like the good is there, that the idea of it is a good idea,
Mhm.
but it's kind of like, and I don't know how obviously I don't want to get too like political on it, but when you look at like socialism and stuff, I mean, socialism, communism, it's a very good idea in a small group of people, and like the general idea of it is a good one. Like, I think it's, it comes from a good place, but when you get to a extensive amount of people, it doesn't work, because
Yeah.
it's on its own different level. And I think that that's the way with a lot of these programs that the government does, which obviously they're considered socialist programs. But when you look at that, these programs, the thought is there, the people are, I don't think that there's a negative ulterior motive, but I mean, there could be, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
but I mean,
Yeah.
end of the day, I think that there's good intentions, but I don't think that they think it through, and people start taking advantage of it, and then it becomes not a good thing. It becomes a
Yeah.
very bad thing for a lot of people, particularly for like taxpayers. And if you own your bit of business, you're typically going to be hit harder with those taxes,
Yeah.
because a lot of that falls on business owners and the middle class and small business owners who are in a higher tax bracket but aren't, quite well off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy because, like, I mean, you could be making 150K, yet you're still like literally still broke. Like, you're still living
Yeah.
paycheck to paycheck, and it is so ridiculous. But it's funny that you brought that up because, like, me and my wife had a, it wasn't like, I don't know if you consider an argument, but it was definitely about like the ideas of capitalism, socialism, communism, and I honestly I don't exactly know what we were arguing. I think it soon kind of became we're arguing just to argue, but in the end, I was like, in the end, I'm always reverting to my my primary beliefs where my to my family, I'm a dictatorship basically. it's either me or my wife in control. Our kids are kind of there to, they're they're ours. They're our what's the term? Man,
Your
it's brain
minions.
farts
Just
today.
kidding.
Yeah, yeah. They're the peasants. Me and my wife were upper class because we have all the money, we have the power. So yeah, family, I'm a dictatorship. To my community, I'm a socialist, but nationally, I'm a capitalist. And it, I mean, socialism and communism, they work in small. I think you could pull it off in small communities, in small groups, but to go through an entire nation, I think it gets out of control, especially when you have people who are already in power and they want to remain in power. They're they're gonna have that power. It really doesn't matter. I mean, and that's why communism always ends up becoming or socialism becomes communism. Communism always becomes a dictatorship, only because there's always going to be power, and that power is always going to be transferred to the person who wants it the most.
Yeah.
And it's it sucks that it doesn't work in a perfect world, but I mean, in the end, I'm still a little bit more capitalist than I feel, or than I am.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like capitalism has benefited people. People talk a lot of crap about capitalism, but the truth is, like, it's benefited more people in poverty than it
Mhm.
has any other kind of system, because there are literally, like, I don't know how many millionaires created in a day simply by just them hustling and coming up with an idea and going through with that idea by creating a product or a service that a community needs. And then all of a sudden, they start making money, and they become, they have a better life for than they have previously. uh yeah,
But yeah,
I think
there's an incentive, and I think that
yeah.
that speaks to is that when you don't have an incentive, when you don't, I mean, look at what happened during COVID. A lot of people had the incentive to not have to work,
Mhm.
and they rode that out as long as they could, Um, whereas if there wasn't that incentive to do better, like if we didn't have that fallback from the government, we would have saw a lot of people out there working, and a lot of businesses that did close that wouldn't have closed.
Mhm.
But I mean that was kind of a unique situation because obviously there's other variables that needed to be addressed. But just in general, though, I mean, it was one of those things where, I mean, I think it really sheds a lot of light on the whole idea of the incentive that you get from capitalism versus that the I don't want to say it disenfranchises you, but it kind of, it doesn't motivate you. We'll say that when you look into other societies with the communist or socialist views.
Yeah.
But um, there's something that you said I was going to touch on it, but I totally lost it.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, I think.
oh, free market. That's what I was going to say. Free market.
Oh
The free
yeah.
market, I feel like, will actually balance things out, and I think that that's one of the biggest things about capitalist setups is that it does actually um, it incentivizes companies and businesses to do better and to compete, because if you don't, you're going to lose your market share to somebody else that does.
Hmm.
And like you said,
Yeah.
I think with the fees and stuff, with your example, that makes a lot of sense. That's something
Yeah.
that could balance out.
Yeah, and that was one of the points that me and my wife, or that my wife brought up, is that socialism and communism is a little bit more like communal based, where it's
Mhm.
about the working class. But in it, like, I think capitalism, you could actually say the same way that it is communal based, because you're not going to want to be a business that damages a community, because the community is not going to support you. They're not going to
Right.
want to give you their hard-earned money in order for you to survive. If you spit in their face, they're just gonna say, you know what, I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna give these guys my money because you guys, don't deserve it. And yeah, you're right. I think, especially in the free market, in capitalism, it's like it's how what can we do to help be a positive effect, especially now. I mean, even now, you got, instead of just an internal combustion engine, you got uh, an electrical vehicle. Then you got hybrids, and you got other companies that are looking at hydrogen. I mean, that's capitalism at work. Car companies are starting to say, you know what, I think we need to start rethinking this because we want to make sure that that we make a vehicle right for everyone, and we don't want to continue to be this kind of company that is just, we're closed minded to ideas of moving forward. We want to be open minded to different ideas of what we could do, and like what kind of innovation we could bring. And that's capitalism at its best, really. I mean, they're taking the concerns of their community, then they're innovating, and then they're trying to solve a problem. And I think that's kind of what every business does anyway. I mean, that's definitely what I do in my business. I try and figure out, like, what is it that my customers are asking for? Like, what is their primary concerns? How can I fix that? And how can I make my service better for their benefit, and not necessarily how can I make more money off of them? It's like the way that I kind of run a business is just like, it's entirely just customer based. Like, I want to make sure that they're good, that they're being benefited. I may lose money, but in the long run, they're going to help me survive. So
Yeah.
you know, it's, that's kind of how that's how I see capitalism in my head.
Yeah. And I think we've seen it a lot with like the protests and the boycotts and everything now, where it's not something where you necessarily have to, where everybody has to, think a certain way or think the same way. But I think the free market ends up speaking for itself. You know what I mean? When you do have, and that's kind of going back to what we talked about last week, was that I don't believe in businesses getting engaged in social things. Anything that's
Political
potentially, anything that's potentially divisive, I guess you could say, is I don't believe that a business should get involved with anything like that, because if they do, then they're losing 50% of their base potentially. And like you brought up last week too, it can be beneficial if like that's what your business is based off of. If you're in the organization, then that makes sense. But otherwise, though, if you're just selling a product or a service and you want to appeal to the biggest population that you can, it doesn't matter really. I mean, it partially matters what the segmentation looks like for your business, but ultimately, it's just not something that I would recommend for a company. Um, if I was hired to as a consultant for a company for marketing, it's not something that I would recommend to do personally.
Mm-hmm.
But again, because you see this change or this immediate just tsunami of market share loss that we've seen with a lot of these companies. And it's easily preventable by just keeping your mouth shut and doing your business. I will say one thing too that I thought was kind of funny, because you have just like these other companies just obtaining market share without having to do anything, right? Without having to do anything. Literally, they just have to keep their mouth shut. But then you see them kind of jumping on the same bandwagon and then doing the same thing. You know what I mean? Like with the Bud Light thing. like they obviously were losing the market share already, and then you have companies like Coors that were rapidly increasing their market share. And then I forget who it was, but then they did a campaign themselves, and I was like, why? Like, why would you do that? Like, all you had to do is just shut your mouth. Like, that's it. You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to waste any money. You didn't have to do a campaign. You just had to be quiet. That was it.
Yeah.
And they did it. You know, so I don't know. It was
Yeah.
just insane.
Yeah, it
But
goes it goes back to brand, like the company's
yeah,
brand. You know, and like I said, that's kind of for my customers or my clients, I only want to do what benefits them and not what the latest trend is. So I'm not gonna, it's all about my client's customers and how can I basically help my client help their customers, you know, improving their life or improving, whatever it is that they're selling, the service or product that they're selling. And yeah, it's what it's really about is your customers and like kind of listening to them and making sure that you're not gonna like, you're not gonna
piss
Bud
them off.
Light it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I mean it's marketing 101 though. I mean, it's like one of the first things I learned in college for when I was in college for business, you know, and that was like one of the biggest things that they teach is like, hey, don't get caught up in the newest trends or whatever, because those trends can change in a heartbeat. And then you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what's going to end up happening, you know? So, I mean, the stuff that they were doing was more well received, you know, over the last few years that they've done it. But now I think people are just at the point where they're just like, yeah, all right, enough, you know?
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
going back to the government overreach and the fees, I really, I think that the fees could work themselves out with free market just doing its own thing. And I do think that I don't know, I don't think I actually asked you how you felt about it. Like, where do you land on that? Like, do you think that the government should step in and try to police these fees, especially with the history of the FTC kind of overstepping their boundaries? Or do you think that that it is something where the government should probably just stay out of it because it's going to generate a higher cost to the consumer? And on top of it, because in my opinion, I mean, this is just how I think. Again, I don't know. I've only read it's not even a fully functional bill or anything like that. I mean, it's like, it looks like it still needs a lot of work, but
Mm-hmm.
based off of what I've read and what I've seen so far, I just don't see any way that it goes without the consumer taking the biggest cost on it, the
Mm-hmm.
biggest loss on it, because they're gonna get charged extra. Like, they're gonna build it into the cost of their plans and services and their products. um and so again, where a small fee may not have been applicable to a specific group of people, it's going to be, everybody's going to get penalized for it, because that cost for that product is going to go up. And you could argue that the free market would still, you know, balance it out again, but still, at the rate that everybody's going to be charged these things, when you're looking at something like Ticketmaster, building it into the cost of it, and that's the number one place that people would go, um, then that's, you know, it's just a higher cost to the consumer. So that's my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. But what's your side on that, or
Um,
what's your take on it?
anywhere where we could prevent crony capitalism from forming, I think is honestly the route that we should take. So I definitely feel like the free market should try and level itself out. I mean, if everyone has an issue with Ticketmaster, there's gonna be a time when someone's gonna create their own ticketing platform, and ultimately you're building an application to sell tickets. And I think sooner or later there's gonna be a few competitors wanting to dethrone Ticketmaster from their position, or any other business that has some kind of ridiculous fees. Like airlines, I think is going to be a little bit more difficult only because there's already kind of a government reach in there. So I definitely think it depends. But when it comes to like a consumer based industry where it's something that could solve itself out, I think it's honestly the route that we should take. So yeah, limited government. I think you know, they should just not take action in it at all. Like at the moment, let's see if it works itself out, and you know, save the trouble. Because you're right, sooner or later the consumer is going to get hurt by the price. Anything that like anything the government does to a business, it always hurts the consumer at the end.
Yeah, and I think that that is probably key. That's the biggest point with that is that these things sound good. Um, they sound really good, and it goes back to everything that we've been talking about is that these things sound good, and I think that in their initial forming of these ideas, I think that they have the best interest of the people in mind. But when it actually gets implemented, it's not something that's going to benefit people in general because you're losing that individual based things like let's say you have like a payment support fee or something like that, right? Which again, and I don't know what specifically is going to be applicable when they try to launch this or not, whether it actually ends up being a thing or not. But um, I don't think it'll actually pass, but we'll see. Um, but if it does, though, I mean, it might be something like a payment support fee or something like that. They could say, "Oh, that's excessive. That's not something that somebody might see as something that they could do." Well, if you're only charged a payment support fee in certain situations, like for example, a company um, has like a automated system or something, and you can go to this automated system and you don't have to pay a support fee. And this support fee, when you call in, it helps to offset the cost of us having to hire somebody to take that call or to um, tie up their time to assist you with doing something that you could potentially do on your own. And so when one person is getting this fee or a group of people are getting these fees uh, in a certain situation, but other people are not getting those fees, if the company ends up having to subsidize like what they're getting by making that a fee that's pushed to everybody, then everybody's the one that ends up having to pay that higher cost, and it's not
Mhm.
something that they might have had to pay in the past because they were doing it the other route that avoids that fee, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I was just looking at some of the comments on there. Yeah, I agree, and we kind of touched on that last time, but they're saying Bud Light will never recover. I personally, I agree. I don't think that Bud Light as a brand is going to recover from it. I think that the damage is done. If I was in charge of marketing or in charge of that brand in general, I probably personally, I think I would try to pull back on the brand and try to come up with a brand new brand. Um, and I would probably try to try to push that separately and have its own brand image. Because, like you were saying last week too, Joe, the brands have their own image, they have their own persona, they have their own life. They have their own life cycle, and um, I think that it's super important to know that and to make sure that you're keeping in line with your brand as much as possible and with that image that you've projected. But also, I think it's also super important to know when that life cycle is over.
Yeah. I think as long as Bud Light is still being owned by IBEV, I definitely think there's no recovering. Simply only because I honestly I don't even think IBEV really even cares. It's just
Well, they got like 90 brands.
they have so many other brands. It's like, when you have so many brands in your control, it's kind of like everything. It almost becomes kind of it becomes useless to want to figure out what each brand is about. Um, and I think ultimately that's kind of what did. And as their Bush in was, selling to like a bigger company like IBEV, and it's not looking good. It's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna. They're gonna recover at all.
Yeah, most of the comments that I'm seeing coming in from like YouTube and from Twitch, pretty much the same stuff. But but yeah, we're already a little bit over on time. But anything else that you wanted to bring up on either one of the topics?
I don't know. I think we've covered a good. It's amazing that it's an hour. We have an hour podcast. It's pretty amazing. Like, I didn't even think we'd go for an hour, but it's so easy to go for two. I bet.
Oh, dude, I could talk to you all night about this stuff, man. I always enjoy having conversations with you too. So I mean, it makes it easy. I didn't even realize it was at the hour mark till it started popping up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't think I have anything else to add. I know after I get off I will, but I'll probably make some notes and then I'll we'll talk about it next Wednesday.
yeah, I'm down for that. Yeah, we could definitely do that next Wednesday. We could talk about that. Also, if you haven't already, you can go on. You go to pelotalks.com. I try to keep it up to date as much as possible, and I think that's probably the best way to go instead of having to go and look for each individual link. But the polls that I post are usually on my Patreon. You do not have to be a subscriber for Patreon to be able to take the polls. I always make them public because I want to get as much feedback as possible on anything that we do, either pre-show or actually post-show. So I keep them open. I don't close them down. I did one poll that I closed down and I switched it off. So now going forward, until it becomes an issue or until I need to change it, I'm going to keep the polls open so you can go on to the pelotalks.com website. And you can actually take the polls there. It'll link you to the Patreon. You can take the polls, or you could also go to pelotalks.com/polls, and that's going to have all the polls on there, not just the most recent ones. So I definitely enjoy reading the statistics and all the information that we get back on it. It can help us to determine what we're going to do for the show, or also if there's anything that we need to address from prior shows that we've done too. So I appreciate any feedback that you give, anything either on the show through if you're listening on Spotify audibly, or if you're actually watching us on either YouTube or Twitch. Definitely appreciate any feedback or any comments that you have for us. So thank you. Anything else that you had, Joe? Do you have any links or anything like with podcasts for your side?
They're all under construction, so
nice.
Hopefully by next Wednesday I'll have something.
Sweet. Yeah, and then we'll put it in there, put it in the descriptions and everything. But again, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. I obviously love to talk about this stuff. Joe likes to talk about this stuff. We could talk about it forever. But we definitely appreciate you giving us the chance to listen and join in the conversation too. So thank you.
Yep, thank you.
You guys have a great night.
Have a good night.